Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. As Florida begins to rebuild communities ravaged by Hurricane Ian, the death toll is rising, most of them in a single county. Some Florida lawmakers explain why they rejected a spending package with disaster relief money. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details.
As search and rescue missions continue throughout Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, officials have discovered that around 100 people have died, at least 54 of those in one Florida county.
Search and rescue teams have been out countless hours, straight through the night, nonstop, with over 800 rescues. That's huge.
Lee County officials ordered evacuations less than 24 hours before landfall. That was a day after some neighboring counties and 2 days after storm surge warnings.
They informed people, and most people did not want to do it. I mean, that's just the reality. So, you're in a situation. Are you going to grab somebody out of their home that doesn't want to? I don't think that's the appropriate use of government. I mean, I think that takes it a little too far.
Shattered Florida communities bond together to cope with the destruction from Ian's wrath. It wiped out the one road that links this island to the rest of the state.
We have a lot of kind-hearted people who pull together all the resources that they have, from water, from fuel, from meat, from all kinds of supplies.
The destruction expected to deal a blow to the state's economy, as rebuilding communities will be costly. Losses are predicted to cost between $28 and $47 billion. Florida lawmakers are now asking the federal government for more money to pay for the damages. That's after nearly all Republicans in Congress voted against a funding bill with $19 billion for disaster relief.
People need to understand it. We can do it. It's possible to do it without loading it with these other things. Because otherwise, you'll have people in the Senate, in the House, that are going to vote against disaster relief because they view these disaster relief bills as ways for other people to get their pork and their pet projects done.
Rubio was not present for the vote, but he said he'd oppose any bill that's packed with unrelated spending, while advocating for more targeted disaster relief funds to pass Congress. Senator Rick Scott explains he voted against the disaster relief because it was lumped together with unrelated spending, like billions more for Ukraine and other measures. Representative Matt Gaetz expressed his opposition on Twitter, saying, quote, "Dear Congress, on behalf of my fellow Florida man in grave need of assistance, just send us like half of what you sent Ukraine. Signed, your fellow Americans." Ian is expected to be one of the costliest storms ever. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Ian made landfall in South Carolina last Friday as a Category 1 hurricane. How serious was the destruction, and how did South Carolina manage it? Joining us today is South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman. Congressman Ralph Norman, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Congressman, Hurricane Ian has devastated a significant part of Florida's west coast, but carried on wreaking havoc in other areas as well. South Carolina, where you're located, also took a pretty serious hit. What can you tell us?
Well, from the time that it hit Georgetown, which is 60 miles northeast of Charleston, we had flooding, we had trees down, and power lines. And luckily, it wasn't the damage that was horrific in Florida, but still, it's a tremendous loss. And mainly, we have farming communities all around South Carolina, over 25,000 farms. And the fact that the crops, we won't know how it affects them. Many were late in getting planted because of the shortage of fertilizer and the uncertainty of being able to sell the crops. But that's where it'll be found, and the things that we produce, cotton, soybeans, corn, going to be affected. But the human impact hasn't been the deaths that Florida has, but still, anytime you have something of a flooding like this, a hurricane, it's a serious matter.
Congressman, from a logistical and rebuilding standpoint, whether it be South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, when you have widespread destruction like this, what are some of the challenges and what type of help do you think is needed?
Well, luckily our governor was quick to address it. He didn't evacuate it, but it was an emergency situation that he stayed on top of all during the storm. The emergency crews that went out at all hours of the night to get power back on, the crews that managed to get the trees off the roadways and wasn't much they could do on the flooding, but they stayed on top of it. On the federal level, this administration, like most everything else they've done, is late to the task of doing anything. And really, during the times that it was hit hardest, both, from not only just Florida, but our coast, Myrtle Beach, and the areas around it'll be interesting to see what dollars come from the federal government. But they're slow to react, but not our team here on the ground. Again, I give all the governor, McMaster did a fantastic job, and I think the crews are continuing to work, and we'll be back up and running.
Congressman, you bring up an interesting point there. Everything nowadays turns into a political opportunity. Is there any concern that hyper-politicization may interfere with the aid in red states or to red states that have been affected, such as South Carolina and Florida?
Yeah, Stephen, for the Vice President, Kamala Harris, to say that whatever dollars come, whenever they come, will be to, low and moderately, income households, and to make a racial issue out of it, I don't think the storm targets any one group of people intentionally. The global alarmists, I think, would admit that. But for her to gaslight that is just very unfortunate. But she continues to do it. And where is she? Why isn't she on the ground in Florida? Why isn't she on the ground looking at the situation in South Carolina? There's a disconnect there that's evident, it's bitter, and it shouldn't happen. But this has gotten to be a common occurrence with this administration, and shows how they've got an elitist approach, and they're just disconnected with everyday Americans.
Congressman, before I let you go, a budget resolution was passed last week to continue funding the federal government. You voted no. Why?
Well, first of all, Steve, it's a tragedy that we don't have a budget. We've known all year long we have a budget to meet. December 30th is the last day. We're supposed to have a budget in place by October 1. And like in 40 years this began where we didn't have a budget, is the same is true now. And the reason I voted against the continuing resolution is, one, it had $12 billion in there for Ukraine. Where's the money for America? Where's the money to fund the border? Where's the money to pay our military who've been fired because not getting the shot? So I just disagreed with the content of it, and I disagreed with the timing. And there were 10 Republicans that voted for it, but it should be extended through in January, where the new Congress will take effect, and not let the Democrats who are running the tables on the Treasury, unfortunately. And this was an easy no vote to me. And they do it every year. We'll get it around Christmas time, and there'll be a Christmas list of giveaways that this administration will want to have, and it's so unfortunate.
South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
President Biden visits Puerto Rico today. That's as thousands still remain without power 2 weeks after Hurricane Fiona hit the island. NTD's Iris Tao has more on what the president is vowing to do.
We came here in person to show that we're with you.
President Biden is in Puerto Rico. The island's just recovering from Hurricane Fiona, which lashed the region last month and caused widespread flooding and power outages.
For days, people live without power, without water, some still in that circumstance. No idea when to be back again.
As thousands still remain without power, Biden announced $60 million in infrastructure funding for the island. And that money comes from a bipartisan infrastructure law passed last year. White House officials say the funding will shore up levees, strengthen flood walls, and create a new flood warning system to help the island prepare for future storms.
We have to ensure that when the next hurricane strikes, Puerto Rico is ready.
And that's before Biden brings up climate change.
And more extreme weather is going to continue to hit this island and hit the United States overall. And as we rebuild, we have to ensure that we build it to last. We're particularly focused on the power grid.
Biden says he'll give more money to the island to transform its power grid with what he calls clean and reliable energy. Meanwhile, President Biden is traveling to Florida on Wednesday to survey damage sustained by Hurricane Ian. But the White House on Monday declined to say if Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will accompany Biden during his visit. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Biden administration is deciding what actions to take if Russia escalates the war in Ukraine. Here's John Kirby from the National Security Council on Monday.
We're watching this as closely as we can, and we've seen nothing that would make us change our strategic deterrent posture. So I think, look, we take these threats seriously, as we must, and we have since the beginning of this war, because it was very early on when Vladimir Putin was using bellicose nuclear rhetoric.
The U.S. is preparing for the possibility that Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons. CNN reports that this is according to 3 sources briefed on the latest intelligence. But officials say they have not detected Russia preparing to use nuclear weapons. Last Friday, Russia officially announced it is annexing part of Ukraine's territories. The U.S. denounced it as illegal. The Supreme Court is beginning a new term. The court has added 9 cases to rule on. 2 of them involve the future of internet speech. In Gonzalez versus Google, the justices will consider how much federal law can protect social media companies. Depending on how they rule, Google, Meta, and Twitter may become more likely to be sued. In another case, justices will consider if social media companies can be held responsible for hosting content by groups responsible for violence. In their start to the new term, the justices also declined an appeal on a gun-related issue. They left in place a ban on devices known as bump stocks, which allow shooters to fire semi-automatic rifles continuously with one pull of the trigger. Republican Senator Rick Scott appears optimistic that his party will take back the Senate in the midterm elections. Here's what he told NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday.
I think we're at 52 seats plus. If you look at Biden's numbers are really bad. People have rejected the Biden agenda. We have great candidates. The Democrats have to defend what Biden's done. So I think it's going to be a good November for Republicans.
Scott is the chairman of the Senate Republicans' campaign arm. He says Republicans still have to keep working hard every day. The balance of the Senate could come down to a few states. The senator recently told Politico that Nevada and Georgia are the key battlegrounds for the Senate majority. According to the latest polls in Wisconsin, incumbent Republican Senator Ron Johnson has taken the lead over his Democratic challenger Mandela Barnes. And in Pennsylvania, the latest polls show GOP nominee Mehmet Oz pulling within 2 points of Democratic nominee John Fetterman. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.